Okay, I think we're hitting critical mass, so we can go ahead and kick things off and get started. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for the Five Borough Waterfront Mayoral Forum this evening. I'm very excited to dive into the discussion with our candidates today. Before we do that, and before we get started, I'll introduce myself and give you a sense of the run of show for today. My name is Tyler Taba. I'm the Director of Resilience at the Waterfront Alliance. I help lead our policy and advocacy work for climate resilience and adaptation. Waterfront Alliance is an 18-year-old nonprofit organization based here in New York City with a mission where, together with our many alliance partners, we lead the way for thriving and resilient waterfronts, shorelines, and coastlines. I'm very thrilled to share that this is the first mayoral forum that we're opening up to our alliance partners, and I think that's going to make it the best one yet. So this forum is co-sponsored by 17 organizations who are all doing really incredible work that has a major positive impact across our city's waterfronts. You can see some of the logos here on the screen, and just want to shout out our co-sponsoring partners at City Island Rising, Environmental Defense Fund, Gowanus Canal Conservancy, the Gowanus Dredgers, Jamaica Bay Rockaway Parks Conservancy, LES Ready, Natural Areas Conservancy, New York City Soil and Water Conservation District, the New York City League of Conservation Voters, Newtown Creek Alliance, Ocean Bay Community Development Corporation, Regional Plan Association, South Bronx Unite, Staten Island Urban Center, the Swim Coalition, Urban Green Council, and Waterfront Alliance. I hope you get to know all these wonderful organizations if you don't know them already, and maybe you live in a neighborhood where one of these organizations works, and you could totally should get involved with them. So, the intention of today's forum is to talk about something that has defined New York City's history and will certainly define its future, and that is our waterfront. 520 linear miles of waterfront across the five boroughs. That is more than Miami, Boston, Los Angeles, and San Francisco combined. This is a waterfront that hosts nearly 1.5 million residents in the present day floodplain, 150 miles of waterfront parks, 25 New York City ferry landings, 6 container terminals that provide goods to all of our residents, and countless businesses, schools, hospitals, subway stations, and so many things along the waterfront. Of course, also ecosystems and habitats. So the next mayor of New York City will have an incredibly important leadership role in leveraging and embracing the waterfront as part of the city's vision for the next 4 years and beyond. And that is why we are here today. So also before we get started, I'd like to play a brief video message from Waterfront Alliance's interim president and CEO, Chris Ward. Some of you may know or remember Chris from his days as the executive director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, or as the commissioner of the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. He was also the board chair at the Waterfront Alliance for over 10 years, and so we're really excited to have him back in this role while we search for a new president and CEO. So let me play this video. Oh, you know what? I gotta do the audio thing. Sorry about that. Okay. Oh, it's not letting me share the sound on this one for some reason. Okay, well, that's all good. Maybe we can play that at a later time. Yeah, it's not letting me play the sound. Okay, no worries. So we'll skip the video of Chris. It's basically him just saying hello and welcoming you all here, which I already kind of did. So with that, I think I can turn it over to our moderator today, who is Samantha Maldonado, who's a senior reporter at The City, where she covers climate resilience, housing, and development. Sam is a very trusted media partner for so many of the environmental organizations across the city. Everyone should follow her reporting. So thanks so much for joining us today, Sam, and I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself and get us started.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And for Tyler for pulling this all together, all the people at the Waterfront Alliance and all of those organizations that Tyler ran through. He's right that lots of people here have been my sources, have been trusted partners of mine in my reporting. The City is a nonprofit digital news outlet. You can find us at thecity.nyc. Sometimes it's a little tricky when I make calls and have to explain myself that I am not from the government, the city. It's from a nonprofit news website. And we cover all five boroughs of New York, which also and often is the waterfront. I'm constantly on or near the water for my reporting. And so I'm very excited to talk to at least these four mayoral candidates about their visions for the waterfront, to ask them some fun questions and some very serious questions as well. And while we're here, I would love for everyone, if they have a moment, to also check out Meet Your Mayor, which is a quiz that we dropped today. We published it in partnership with WNYC and Gothamist, and it is a quiz you take, and it will match you with one of the 12 mayoral candidates that we spotlit. And I believe they are all on here, the ones that are coming. So feel free to go to thecity.nyc and find Meet Your Mayor. It will help you navigate who to vote for and how to do ranked choice. And thank you for dropping it in the chat. That's helpful. Before we get going, I know we have a couple more minutes before Controller Brad Lander gets here. We can roll through kind of how this is going to work. So we're having about 20 minutes with each of the four candidates who have agreed and were able to come to this discussion. We came up with some questions, a whole variety of them, in partnership with the organizations that Tyler had mentioned at the top. They are high level for the most part. I'm going to push for specifics as well, just to get a sense of all the things that the waterfront can be and is, and how as mayor, these candidates would work with partners and shape their policies to really foster the waterfront as a place for New Yorkers. So we'll have 20 minutes with each of them, starting with Comptroller Lander. Scott Stringer, the former comptroller, will be next. Jim Walden, who is running as an independent, will be third. And lastly will be Michael Blake, who is formerly an assembly member. Tyler, do we have any updates from them?
Working on, so I know Comptroller Lander is coming on at 7:10, so we have another minute or so here to give him to join us. But yes, so we'll have this kind of moderated Q&A, and not every candidate was able to join, but so many were interested, and so maybe we'll think about doing some kind of follow-up to this where we interview some of the candidates who weren't able to make it. Obviously, the campaign season is very busy, but we want to get as many of the candidates as possible talking about these issues. Oh, wonderful. Here we go.
Cool.
Well,
All
I'll
right,
turn it
we're
back
ready to
over
go.
to you, Sam.
Great. Hi, Comptroller Lander. How's it going?
It's going great. Thank you guys for doing this.
Thank you so much for joining us. So we have about 20 minutes with you, which I appreciate. You know me from my being a reporter with the city.
Indeed.
And so I really appreciate you being here at today's Five Borough Waterfront Mayoral Forum. So to start things off, I'll give you a minute to sort of jump right into this. If you have any opening remarks that you'd like to make, given the theme and the partners who are here.
Great. Well, thank you, Tyler and Waterfront Alliance for hosting. I'm a longtime friend and fan of the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance, going back to the days of Roland Lewis when I was at the Pratt Center. And Samantha, thank you, and the city as well. I was thinking about you and Claudia over the past few days and those amazing stories about our deliveristas, which is not the focus of tonight's forum, but really does show how journalism can make a difference and what's at stake in this election. Part of what's at stake is our harbor, is our waterfront, is the way in which our cities' rising sea levels and temperatures are not getting anywhere near enough attention in this race. We need a plan for a growing, thriving city that has to be a sustainable city that makes wise use of its waterfront and wise use of its harbor. And I'm deeply committed to doing that. I've done that alongside you in a lot of ways. When I was a council member and I represented Piers 7, 8, and 9, I worked hard to make sure that Brooklyn Marine Terminal stayed working waterfront. I worked together to help craft plans that would enable EDC to keep supporting a working waterfront on Staten Island, on Brooklyn, in Brooklyn, and throughout. As a city council member, I was proud to work very closely with the Gowanus Canal Conservancy on the Gowanus rezoning and make sure we did not do that, even though we wanted a lot of affordable housing, unless we could guarantee that we would be reducing stormwater runoff. We won a great new stormwater rule and $200 million of infrastructure investment so that we could keep making the canal cleaner and more accessible. And that's the kind of leadership I'm going to bring. Oh, one more thing, in the controller's office, I was proud to work with a lot of the neighborhood groups on a recognizing that we need physical infrastructure for the climate crisis, but we also need social infrastructure. And what we did was talk to the groups who had gotten created or grown during Superstorm Sandy about what had changed over the next 10 years, both what physical infrastructure still needed investing, but also how to support grassroots groups and social infrastructure so people can maintain bioswales, keep an eye on neighbors in climate crises, and make sure we're building out a genuinely sustainable and working waterfront. I'm excited to partner with you to implement Local Law 122, the 5-borough climate adaptation plan, to do it in a way that's consistent with the city's comprehensive waterfront plan. It is possible to find space for new affordable housing and jobs at the same time as we plan for rising seas and temperatures, open up more access to our waterfronts, keep them working, and make them sustainable. This has been a harbor city for 400 years. That's why it's here. It's our job to keep it a harbor city for 400 more, and that future begins with the next mayor.
Great, thank you. And I'd love to hear your specific definition for climate resilience and adaptation, especially how it relates to New York City. You threw around some words, some sustainability, adaptation, resilience. Tell us what that means.
Yeah, look, what we want is, again, this has been a harbor city for 400 years. In that time, what the waterfront has done has changed, right? Like before it was an industrial waterfront, it was a natural waterfront, in which people fished and, used it as a way of having an aquacultural life. Then it became a working waterfront in which it was industrial. Unfortunately, that was not in so many cases sustainable. Gowanus Canal is a great example. It was one of the busiest industrial waterways in the country, but unfortunately, during that time, it was so polluted that dissolved oxygen reduced to zero. And now we face this challenge that rising sea levels threaten people who live near it and who work near it. And we need more housing in the city, but that doesn't mean we can build housing that's in vulnerable places. And we want to keep investing in a working waterfront as well. So to me, resilience and sustainability, it means, are we doing our part to be reducing carbon emissions and thinking about that throughout? Are we making sure that we are planning with climate change in mind? So in the Gowanus rezoning, for example, what that meant was saying your waterfront access plan, you have to show us what it's going to look like in 2100 when sea levels are risen. And so there are both lower level paths and higher level paths, so that we're planning with that sea level rise in mind and doing everything we can to support and strengthen communities, keep jobs, build for a growing city, but do it with the realities of the climate crisis in mind.
And New York City has already been a leader in climate resilience and adaptation nationally. But as we know, there are federal cuts and policies that will threaten our leadership and our plans on the horizon. Can you be specific and name 2 ways that you will ensure New Yorkers who live and work by the shoreline get the infrastructure and everything that they depend on, and that is safe and protected from
Yeah.
rising sea levels and intense storms?
Yeah, look, this is going to be a real challenge. What the Trump administration is doing by not just cutting the Inflation Reduction Act, not just putting our offshore wind projects in jeopardy, but like threatening banks who continue to fund climate projects. I'll give just one example. Yesterday, I cast votes at the New York City Banking Commission against Citibank's, Wells Fargo, and JP Morgan Chase, because in Citibank's case in particular, they're freezing people's IRA and greenhouse gas reduction fund money even in advance of what the federal government is demanding or requiring. So I am going to fight back and stand up, and in some cases figure out where we can use city capital dollars to replace dollars that the federal government is cutting. One great example of this, to be specific, is my plan for public solar NYC, which will allow us to use city capital dollars for rooftop solar. And we can do that in places that federal funding was supposed to flow if that money is cut, because rooftop solar infrastructure, whether that's on buildings by the harbor or on small homes in neighborhoods that'll have trouble affording it otherwise. That is city infrastructure, and it's permissible to use municipal finance and city capital. So that's one thing we can do to protect our communities from both the ravages of climate change and the harms of Trump budget cuts. And then I guess in terms of like protecting communities and people, to me, it really comes down to planning. I mean, the reason I like the comprehensive waterfront plan, the reason I and Antonio Reynoso have long supported comprehensive planning in the harbor and more broadly is like that's just how you have to structure things. So in Gowanus, that meant we could do new housing, but only if it came with a modern waterfront access plan that attended to climate change all the way out to 2100. And that included reducing stormwater overflow and investments in flooding. And that's the approach I'll take everywhere. That's the approach I'll take at Brooklyn Marine Terminal and any other place this comes up. Oh, one thing I'm going to mention here, just because some people might say, well, I saw your plan to build 50,000 new homes on 4 of the city's 12 city-owned municipal golf courses. I want to be clear, we will not be doing it on any golf courses that are in flood zones, and we will only be doing it on golf courses that are convenient to transit. Like in every case, we need growth and affordability. It must come with sustainability principles, and that means housing near transit. That means not developing in low-lying areas that are vulnerable to flooding. In the same way that on the working waterfront, it means paying attention to keeping waterfront access and focusing on jobs as well as housing growth.
And I'm curious, I mean, you named a lot of things that the waterfront can be, and we see it as a place for jobs, a place for housing, possibly. It's a recreation, all sorts of things. And so how do you balance the way that New York should have the relationship with the waterfront? What
Yeah.
do you envision?
So first, I'll just say here, like my favorite way to think about this is Walt Whitman's Crossing Brooklyn Ferry poem, which I think is worth reading if you haven't, because, you know, he wrote it saying, "Oh, you 100 years hence, just as you were on ferries crossing Brooklyn Ferry, so am I." And the irony of that was for most of that 100 years, no one was on ferries. Like they stopped being the main mode of transit not that long after he wrote that poem, and people switched to subways and stopped and started neglecting the waterfront. But lo and behold, now we have a ferry system again that a lot more people are taking and using, that I audited to help get stronger as controller, and that I will continue to help grow and support as mayor. I'd like to see the ferries, for example, connected via Omni so that you could go from subway to bus to ferry to city bike without having it be such a disconnected and broken system. So that's part of my transportation plan. Like we lean in on blue highways, we make transportation more connected. In terms of doing the planning, look, it's got to be able to be all those things. I mean, there's spots on the water that are the most incredible parks in New York City, and I want them to stay, and I want more park and open space on the waterfront. There's great working waterfront, and we want more of it. We want to make sure both in Sunset Park and in Red Hook that more businesses are using the working waterfront. And yes, there are places that are not low-lying, like we did in some of the sites around the Gowanus Canal, that are appropriate for housing. In order to do that, you got to bring people together, make clear what the principles are, and climate resilience and adaptation have to be defined as core principles at the beginning of that process, and then have the hard conversations about the trade-offs, because yeah, you can't do everything everywhere. There are sites where hard choices have to be made, but we do want a waterfront that is a place for recreation, a place for sustainability, a place for education like the Harbor School, a place for jobs, and yes, where appropriate, places for housing as well.
You did mention waterfront access, and we have to acknowledge that not every community has the same kind of waterfront access. It varies a lot by income, by race, by which borough and where in the borough different communities are. And I'm curious about how you will overcome existing barriers to make sure that public waterfront access is equitable across all boroughs in all neighborhoods for all New Yorkers. And a follow-up
Yeah,
to that
this
is if you have an area that you'd prioritize.
an area that I prioritize for more waterfront access. Yeah,
However
I mean,
you would
look,
make.
one of the, yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, look, one of the things I haven't mentioned yet that I'm proudest of working in my career is that for the 5 years that I was at the Pratt Center for Community Development, we really focused on the Bronx River, and what happened up there, working with the Bronx River Alliance and the Southern Bronx River Watershed Alliance and Youth Ministries for Peace and Justice and the Point. It was extraordinary. I mean, Starlight Park up there is one of my favorite parks in New York City. Watching what happened for those places where they tore down the bits of the Sheridan Expressway and reconnected that community to its waterfront is incredible. So that, look, I mean, low-income communities like the South Bronx that have waterfront but don't have access to it, like those are the places where we should focus. Obviously, Red Hook is close to me, so that's a place I was just down at Valentino Pier after, getting Steve's key lime pies over the weekend. And, it's amazing what's going on there. So those are where my focus is on access will be. Now, let's be clear, that's also got to go along with education, with teaching kids to swim. And it's not lost on me that on a couple of those places in the Bronx, we've lost kids each of the last few summers. And so opening up waterfront access has to go along with a plan for lifeguards, but also a plan for like teaching more of our kids swimming. So access has got to be a real, comprehensive approach.
Um, I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about shoreline protection as well. You're familiar with the threats that are by the waterfront because of the waterfront. And so I'm curious as mayor how you would approach balancing both nature-based green infrastructure and then more hardened gray infrastructure solutions.
Yeah. We've got some great examples. I mean, here it seems to me like Brooklyn Bridge Park is just such a great example of how when you can do really good landscape design, you can have the riprap, like where the rocks, are, underneath Pier 5, and you can have some parts that are more like beach and get downs and protected, and you can have some harder edges like there are on the piers. So I guess I'm not the expert on like how you decide which place gets which treatment. I think that has to be part of a planning process, and it depends what you're trying to do. If this is a place where it's, a focus on working waterfront, then that's going to be harder edged. Obviously part of the challenge in Gowanus was that the bulkheads had to support the remediation. And so there had to be an enormous amount of bulkhead replacement just to facilitate the dredging of the canal. And that was a challenge in figuring out how we could plan. We wanted to find more areas for access, but first everybody had to replace their bulkheads in order to facilitate the remediation in the canal. Look, this is part of what the climate adaptation and the comprehensive waterfront plan are to do. We want a harbor that has a mix of those things, that's got places where you can get down in a kayak, that have places where, you Sorry, I lost you. My connection is unstable.
That's okay. All set. Well, I did hear the word canoe, and so I'm curious when the last time you got in or on the water was.
Let's see. The last time I was on the last time I was on the water. I mean, on January 1st, I always do the polar bear plunge. So probably last time I've been in the water was at Coney Island on January 1st. Not yet quite warm enough for summer swimming. Trying to think. I mean, I often go down with the Gowanus Dredgers and have done kayaking in the Gowanus Canal many times. That's probably the most recent time I was in a kayak or a canoe. I do have one confession here that people on this may not like, but one summer, my son Marek worked at one of the jet ski operators in the harbor. And I mean, jet skis are not a sustainable form of transportation, and it is not in my transportation plan that there be more jet skis at all. But I will say it was thrilling to be out in the harbor on a jet ski the summer that he worked at one of those places. Honestly, like when you see Hellgate on a jet ski, you like have a whole different idea of why they call it Hellgate. And I'm on ferries. I take the ferries from time to time. So, you know, and they're just a great form of transportation. And so those I'm on, you know, often enough.
If you get elected mayor, will you commit to trying out a new water body in the first 100 days, whether that's canoeing, kayaking, swimming?
Love that. Yes. I mean, I want to go to one place I have not been is that I haven't been on oh my God, now I'm spacing the island up in the Bronx that has the Potter's Field.
Heart,
Uh
Island?
Sorry, Hart Island. So, like, I want to get up to Hart Island. I would love to get out. I actually I want to see the ship graveyard off Staten, the west side of Staten Island, which I've heard great things about, but haven't had a chance to get to myself. I did kayak in the park on the site of the former dump on Staten Island, which is an amazing new park. And as they were doing that transformation a couple of years ago, Eloise Hirsch was actually a classmate of my dad's. And so I went out with her on some kayaks there, but I'd like to get back there. I hear it's amazing, the transformation that has happened at Fresh Kills.
Well, thank you for this. It sounds like you spent a lot of time and have spent a lot of time on and around the water. We will hold you to that in the first 100 days at
Please.
Hart
No,
Island.
this will be great. Honestly, you make some promises on the campaign trail, but there's few that I'll be as excited to keep as this one. So and I've committed also, one other thing I've committed to is having a park of the month. So I'm going to be in a different New York City park every month, and the ones that are on the waterfront will be, you know, well, we can say we'll put those in quite regularly.
Great. Well, thank you for being with us. If you would like to share any closing remarks in about 30 seconds, we will take final thoughts to get to anything that we didn't ask.
Yeah, so look, I mean, I think you can see I love and have spent a lot of time thinking about the waterfront and how we balance the interests there and how we attend to, climate adaptation, and that I've done a lot of it in partnership with your member groups and communities. I guess the thing I'll close with, and this just doesn't come up as much in the mayor's race as maybe I think it should, you also need someone who knows how city government works, who's tried to pull a lot of those levers, ferry system, who's done the investigations of what the infrastructure looks like, who's made plans work like I did in Gowanus. So if you're looking for someone who cares about planning, who understands the threats and realities of climate change, who cares about the waterfront, but who also has real experience making city government work for working people, I'm going to bring honest, effective leadership back to City Hall, make this a safer, more livable, more affordable, and better run city, and do it by making government work for all New Yorkers. So thank you very much.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Great. So that was good. And next up we have former comptroller Scott Stringer. I see he is here as part of the Zoom. Former comptroller, can you hear me? Okay, great. I think you have to unmute. Great. Hi, welcome. I'm Samantha Maldonado, reporter with the news outlet The City. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
So you are second in line of our 4 candidates who will be on this moderated panel today. And so I'd like to give you about a minute to start off with an introduction and any opening remarks you'd like to make.
Well, first of all, it's great to be back with so many people I've worked with over the years at the Waterfront Alliance. And look, I think we all agree that this is a consequential moment in our city's history. We have a government that literally has to be rebuilt, reconstituted after 4 years of corruption and inaction. And I think we need a mayor who has competence and experience, but also a vision for what this city can be about. And in every elective office I've had over the last 30 years, I have brought real fundamental change to these positions. In Albany, I ended empty seat voting, took on the political establishment. As Manhattan Borough president, I worked on waterfront issues, especially on the west side, and made sure that we incorporated a real resiliency plan. I was there during Hurricane Sandy. I was there during the post-Sandy audit investigation I did. learned a lot about what's possible for a waterfront, for resiliency. And I'd like to put that experience to work for New Yorkers. And that's why I'm here tonight, to make my case to all of you.
Great, thank you. So let's just get some level setting done. Can you define climate resilience and adaptation, and specifically what that means in New York City?
Well, to me, it means the lived experience of the hurricane. When Hurricane Sandy hit and I was Manhattan Borough President, I saw firsthand the damage that was done in Lower Manhattan. We learned a lot of tough lessons back then as we were literally trying to get seniors medication in public housing developments, how we had to go out and make sure people were safe. And we saw the incredible damage that storm surge caused. I think we learned a powerful lesson that salt and copper don't mix, and boilers in basements is probably not where a resiliency future should land. But what I did learn and what I understood about resiliency is how does the city respond to climate change, and how do we prepare for the next big storm? And I went out to every impacted Sandy area as controller and brought hundreds and hundreds of people to testify about their actual experience, never being able to move back to their homes, lost paperwork, poorly managed Sandy response and recovery, understanding that if we don't work with our wetlands and we don't come up with a resiliency strategy that is 5 borough in scope, 520 miles of waterfront in this magical city, then we are leaving us very vulnerable to the next storm. I would say to you that we are not prepared. We have gotten lazy in this, not all of you on this call, but let's face it, OEM and all the relevant agencies, there has been no serious discussion in my mind about how to prepare for the storm, and we are slow walking the resiliency infrastructure that we have to build.
Can you speak more about that? And you sort of framed your response as stemming from Sandy, which is, what are we, 13 years almost into the past. Tell us about the future and the resiliency response that we actually need.
Well, the future is what we talked about 13 years ago. Could we develop a infrastructure plan, looking at our waterfront and thinking about resiliency, not just building housing, not just building housing that is, not directly hit with waterfront surge, but could we come up with a wetland strategy to invest in the waterfront infrastructure? When I was controller, I said, why not issue blue bonds in addition to green bonds so we could invest? I think that's invest in our waterfront and actually think about that. Why are we cementing over places in Staten Island that could be used as a buffer against storm surge? That was some of the ideas that I think we should deal with. We also have to think about how can we best serve our communities in terms of education and climate change, and how can we set an example for the rest of the country? Many of you remember that as controller, I did the historic divestment from fossil fuel, $4 billion. We took on oil companies, Chevron and the like, to say to people that we have to practice what we preach, and we have to start divestment to save our planet. As controller, I did work around the country to make sure that we took on oil companies and companies who pollute, and how we should not be investing in them. So I think my record is clear. I would like to see a future where we're actually community engaged, and it doesn't have to just stop with storm surge and Sandy. I do think there are environmental protocols that we can put in place in every community so that we can create healthy neighborhoods, invest in park and open space. Obviously, that the future of our city depends on parks. We have to go back to this compact we have with our people to keep them in the city, that suggests the opportunity for children in particular to be able to play and enjoy their lives in all of our waterfront parks. But they have to be maintained, they have to be repaired. And I would like to see us expand parklets in all 5 boroughs.
And can you speak more about that? We know that there's inequity when it comes to waterfront access and even shorefront protection, depending on what community you live in. That can be neighborhood by neighborhood, even beyond borough by borough. How would you overcome those barriers? How would you forward a more equitable waterfront and protection?
I think we have to start thinking about the kind of investments we're going to make and the resources we're going to allocate to those communities. There's no question that when we have something as great as the Central Park Conservancy, we know Central Park is always going to be cared for and maintained. But as you get into our other waterfront areas and waterfront parks, we do see, depending on the community, a tremendous divestment in those neighborhoods. So part of what we have to do is, one, increase the parks budget to that final goal of 1% that many of us have been advocating for longer than I'm going to admit. And when we allocate that, we have to sort of reimagine the possibility of the Parks Department really going out and becoming exciting again about how we can build with community boards, local organizations, a real waterfront plan in every waterfront park in New York City. It's a lot of miles, 520. And some communities have great resources and a lot don't. But I think my financial experience, my ability to bring the best and the brightest people into city agencies again to think out these issues, I think could be very valuable in realizing some of our goals.
To shift gears a little bit, I'm very curious about your vision for growing and greening the maritime sector over the next 4 years specifically. Well, where will you start?
I will tell you that I'm a disciple of Jerry Nadler, who understands that our port and our docks, especially given the challenges of e-commerce and trucking. I'm a big proponent of blue highways. I'm a big proponent of coming up with a comprehensive plan that is not just focused on waking up in the morning and saying, I like this neighborhood, but trying to do something comprehensive and real to start looking at the ports from the view of commerce and industry, and also aligning that with the environment, because I think it goes hand in hand. I think the waterways are a great commerce opportunity for us. We should look at our peers, look at the way we deal with some of those businesses, and also sort of move our commerce infrastructure off our highways and local streets and take advantage of the amazing ports and waterways that we have. And I would certainly work with local stakeholders in all of our boroughs, starting in Brooklyn at the Brooklyn waterfront, to maintain those piers. And when you look at what we were able to accomplish when I was in Albany, working with various stakeholders on the West Side waterfront, the pier rehabilitation, the legislation that was passed to create this amazing waterfront opportunity, why can't we do that in all 5 boroughs, starting in all of our local neighborhoods?
So far we've talked about the waterfront as a place for jobs, a place for commerce, a place that is a threat sometimes, a place for waterfront access. What kind of relationship would you want to foster between New Yorkers and the waterfront if you were mayor? And what are 2 ways that you would do that in the first, couple of years of your term?
Well, let me tell you something. But you say something interesting. You say the first couple of years. One thing I would say to everybody who's been involved in government, the shelf life of mayors and governors are getting shorter and shorter. So you really can't have a mayor on training wheels to realize some of these issues. It's easy to come on a Zoom and tell everybody, what you want to do, but it's a lot harder to figure out how to do it. And so I think what I bring to this race is real experience, putting programs in place that can be realized in the first and second year, because by the time we get to year 3 and 4, you already start to see the real tension and the challenges that mayors go through. So I would want to hit the ground running with a very comprehensive waterfront plan. But look, this is what I love about, the ferry to Roosevelt Island. This is what I love about, kids going to school on Roosevelt Island from Manhattan, just taking that ferry. It's you're wide-eyed and open. You see where I live from FIDI, in the financial district, to actually going out and seeing what it looks like to see the Statue of Liberty and all the opportunities the waterfront presents itself for recreation, for opportunity, for teaching kids about water and exploration. I think we need a mayor who'd be very much working with the Parks Department and the other agencies to make that happen.
And so I'm curious if you can just name the 2 top priorities then for the waterfront. I mean, you said a waterfront plan, but I'm curious, what are the 2 actual plans that you would forward?
Well, first, I do think we need, as we mentioned, we need to realize our ports and realize the waterfront as a place of commerce, especially as it relates to the environment I mentioned. I think that would be a top priority. But I also think we have an opportunity to give people the access to the waterfront, to create beaches and waterways for people to actually engage in recreation. When I was Manhattan Borough President, we were able to get a grant for Lower Manhattan on the east side to explore what we could create on the east side of Manhattan. I worked to recreate and reimagine the waterfront successfully with the amazing parks that we created on the west side. I think I have the experience to look at issues not just necessarily on the waterway, but the Queensway, and to realize that open space is healthy. It attracts people from all over the world to live here and stay here. It's a benefit to children, but those would be my priorities: recreation, reimagining some of our structures and waterfronts that have not been invested in. We talked about in communities that are economically challenged, communities of color. I would like to play a role there, not just with capital dollars, but bringing in real planning experts, having a city planning commission that would not just plan for affordable housing and density, but also spend some time really planning what open space and access to the waterfront can mean for people.
In a lot of our waterfront planning and projects, we've relied on federal funds. And obviously, the feds have shown themselves so far to not quite be the same kind of partner that we've relied on, with funding drying up, different policies. The New York City relationship with the federal government is certainly changing. And so I'm curious, given all of that, how you would ensure that New Yorkers who live and work along the shoreline are prepared and safe for intense storms, sea level rise, and even just for some of these visions that you mentioned that really would rely or benefit from federal funding that may not be there.
Well, look, I think there's a couple things we have to focus on. There's no question that this Trump 2 is hell-bent on creating as much havoc and chaos for New York City as they can possibly imagine to throw at us. We saw $80 million captured, money that was already appropriated. They clawed that money back. They looked at our budget codes. They took back $80 million in federal funding. They're trying to do more of that, trying to do it on a federal level, but they're really targeting cities like New York. I think we have to start setting aside a very, very rainy day fund for some of the major safety net challenges that we have, so that we can reimburse to get to a strategy of winning the congressional midterm elections. I think that is paramount. The next mayor has to come in and think about the budget through the lens of a short-term and long-term goals. Short-term, we got to hold the line. We have to reimburse or recommit when they take that money away. A state-city collaboration would be a priority I would have, working with Governor Hochul and the state legislature. And then look, it's not going to be easy with these folks, but it's not going to last forever. And a lot of the work and planning that we can do will take time. You're not going to get federal money appropriated, especially when so many of these projects have been slow up even under a Biden administration. I think we should allocate capital dollars, city dollars, working with the state to get a lot of our resiliency projects up and running. We've got a lot of good legislative initiatives, a lot of good goals in terms of where we want to see ourselves by 2030. I'm always hesitant about those goals because I think sometimes they're just made up out of thin air. But I think in this case, we really have to move to those goals, recognizing that we have to play chess with the federal government, not checkers.
I'm going to take a turn to a slightly more lighthearted question, which is, what is your favorite waterfront activity?
I like taking my children to the park, Rockefeller Park, which is right on the water, with views of the Statue of Liberty and all the boats. And while I watch them play flag football and basketball and run around with their friends, there's nothing better than walking through the path and looking at the wonderful water. I just find it relaxing and incredibly energizing. And then, my wife and I really like to spend time. We're watching the kids, but we're really just chilling out. And that's really what you're supposed to do at these parks.
Mm-hmm. What's your favorite water body in New York City?
My favorite water body? I don't have a favorite water body, but I'm
gotta get one.
I'm the former Manhattan Borough President, so I kind of like the island from top where I grew up in Washington Heights all the way where I live now in the financial district. And I've had an opportunity to literally work in every community that had access to the waterfront. So can I say the Manhattan water, but as I run for citywide office, I love them all.
Have you ever been on a canoe or kayak or other sort of boat that's not the ferry?
Yes, I
Tell
have
us about that.
canoed, I have kayak. I started when I was a kid at being sent off to sleepaway camp.
Oh,
It was,
within New York City though.
uh, yeah, I have canoed in the water when I was a kid, but mostly when I was at camp.
If you're elected mayor, will you commit to doing it again within your first 100 days?
To jump into a canoe on the Hudson River, no. But
There's other water bodies.
but I've also used I've also been taken on tours of waterfront when we were exploring resiliency. A lot of the organizations, one of the organizations that I work with, took me on an all-day boat ride. We were able to see all the different crevices and opportunities for stopping storm surge and some of the proposals that were out there. So I did enjoy that a lot.
Well, I have to say, I just made my grad students go canoeing on the Gowanus, so open mind.
Never say never.
I'm wondering also if you have a vision for the waterfront that is one that takes into account both nature-based infrastructure and more hard sort of constructed infrastructure. You know, we talked about shoreline protection, and there's a need to do both. How would you move that forward if elected?
I think I outlined it to you. You know, I think we have to get a lot of the proposed resiliency projects that are on the drawing boards now and actually realize those resiliency projects. And so I would work with experts, people in this community who are on the Zoom call tonight, folks that I've worked with over, you know, the last 10, 15 years, 20 years on these issues, and bring stakeholders into into City Hall to actually create timelines and protocols to get things done, whether it's finishing and the wonderment of what I think Roosevelt Island, where I get to take my kids and run around, not in the water canoeing, but, you know, understanding just how wonderful that is. I would be committed to doing that as mayor.
Is there anything else that we haven't asked that you'd like to remark on in the final minute that we have?
You know, I just want to say that I think this race is really about who best can manage the city, who best can bring in the people with great capacity, who can manage the resiliency challenges and the waterfront challenges that we have. I'd like to make it a priority as mayor. It's work that I've been involved in for the last, you know, since I was Manhattan Borough president. I would like to continue that work. But again, I think what this race is about is electing somebody who has deep rooted experience in understanding city agencies, understanding how to move money and finance to get projects completed. I think we talk a lot about our aspirations, which are exciting. We talk about canoeing and going rowboating. That's exciting. But at the end of the day, the job of the mayor is to be at City Hall running a government that can actually get these projects done. What I saw during Sandy, what I learned during those moments 13 years ago was that the government broke down. We did not have agencies equipped to handle the next storm. We did not have a resiliency agenda. We had agencies like OEM that had to go out and hire outside contractors to get people back in their homes, to get homes rebuilt. We had tremendous collateral damage, not just the $1 billion that we lost in our infrastructure, not just the harm that was caused by community organizations being put out of business, public housing developments, basically without hot water and electricity. I think the first priority I would do as mayor is come up with an emergency management plan and a resiliency plan that would be aligned, not just for our economy, but also for the safety of New Yorkers. I worry about climate change because I really saw it firsthand. I audited it, I understand it, and I also think we have to be much more proactive. And that's true in the larger issues in urban America. We have to start thinking about how we also tackle corporate America and hold them to the highest environmental standards. I did that as controller, and I certainly would do that as mayor.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks,
Appreciate your
Samantha.
time.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Take care. Okay. And for our third panelist, we have Jim Walden. Jim, hi, I'm Samantha Maldonado, reporter with the news outlet The City. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
We're really excited to hear from you, and I will give you time to make opening remarks, just to introduce yourself. You are running as an independent, so you're standing out from the pack of people who are here in that way. So, give us your introduction and, tell us why you're here.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me. It's not always the case that the independent gets invited to some of these forums, so I was happy to attend. Hi, Tyler. Thanks for all the amazing work that the Waterfront Alliance has done and for hosting this. And Samantha, you didn't need to introduce yourself because I know who you are and you do some incredible work, so thank you. So just by way of introduction, I'm a former federal prosecutor, kind of not the only waterfront experience I had there was knowing about the Waterfront Commission back in the old days of corruption on the waterfront. It still exists. And for the last 23 years, I've been a private lawyer. And over the course of time, I've done many, many pro bono projects to try to support communities in a lot of different ways, including with parks and equity in terms of access and making sure that people that want to develop parkland for private interests get held accountable. I've supported community gardens. And, obviously the waterfront is hugely important. One of the things that surprised me as I was preparing to run is that there is so much just activity around all of the different areas and so much inequity. There's so little waterfront access in the Bronx. There's so much in other places. We've got big pockets of pollution still. Even in places where there was supposed to be more infrastructure, like in the Gowanus project, epic pollution still exists. Newtown Creek, we've all known that that's been a massive problem for years. And as I've read about all of the things that politicians and agencies have said about everything, we're not doing the fundamentals properly, right? We're not going building by building and really making sure that every property is resilient to stop damage from something like a Superstorm Sandy. We don't have a comprehensive storm surge barrier that is something that the Army Corps of Engineers has been talking about. We have storm surge barriers in certain places, but not one that's comprehensive. So in terms of my platform as mayor, I think that it is critically important for the city to prioritize the things that are the most important to us, and the waterfront is one of our most valuable assets. It may be in some ways our most valuable asset. And I was surprised to learn that there's never been a deputy mayor for waterfront. And so when I'm mayor, I'm going to appoint someone to that newly created position that is a real subject matter expert on all of the different things that we do, that we need to do around the waterfront, not just to be resilient to the next superstorm, but to adapt. Projects like the Billion Oyster Project, I think is a brilliant idea. Developing natural reefs is critically important to the plan. Obviously, there has to be close coordination with our larger goals of trying to get to net zero. There's a million things that we should be doing that we're not doing. And so I would like to be a mayor that helps bring us together with agencies that aren't so siloed and will really work under regardless of which agency carries what, we'll work with a center point of contact and a deputy mayor that will help do everything that we need to do to make the waterfront sustainable and better and more accessible and cleaner for the next 400 years.
That was very specific. You got ahead of me. I was going to ask you for a specific plan, so that's great. One thing I do want to ask is, the waterfront is an area, there's lots of areas of waterfronts along the boroughs and different neighborhoods, but there's lots of competing interests there, right? There's recreation, there's maritime use, jobs, housing, there's, the shoreline as a threat and also the shoreline as somewhere to be. How do you balance those competing interests, and how does that fit into your vision of the relationship that New Yorkers should have with the waterfront?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the thing that cuts through all that is two things, environmental remediation and access. like in terms of getting the waterfront right, to me, those are the two most important things, whether we're talking about the cargo terminal in Red Hook, or we're talking about Newtown Creek, or we're talking about, you know, ferry service between, Manhattan and other boroughs. We have to make sure that we can accommodate everything that we want to do and accommodate some additional development, development that is married with putting new barriers in, putting new floodgates in and the like. And I don't think that it's appropriate to say, well, I'm going to focus on, trying to create blue highways or those or prioritize that over the things that people really need to be able to live healthy lives. And so my real two focuses are going to be, regardless of whether we're talking about a shipping terminal or we're talking about a park, is resilience and remediation. So places like Dead Horse Beach is a place that we've had environmental problems for years. No one's ever cleaned it up. It's a place where we could have a vibrant waterfront for a community that needs water access. So I'm not sure if I answered your specific question, Samantha, but I guess I would incorporate your word into my approach, which is balance, right? I think that a policy that tries to make sure that we're doing all of the fundamentals serves all of the constituencies who want to use the waterfront, whether they're private or commercial.
And that brings me to my question about equity, which is that, as you sort of started pointing to, not every community has an equitable access to the waterfront for recreation, in terms of their protection levels, things like that. How would you overcome those barriers, create more equity when it comes to the waterfront?
Yeah, so one of the major things that I would task the deputy mayor with doing is opening up the waterfront to communities. I mean, honestly, I would focus on the Bronx. There is so much that we need to do for the Bronx that elected officials have been saying they're going to do for years. Waterfront access is one of them. I'm not an expert in all of the places where we can change what we have to create greater access, whether it's creating man-made beaches or boat houses, or there is a wonderful, I forget the kayak club, but there's a kayak club up there. But creating all of those opportunities for communities in the Bronx to really not have to drive 30 miles in order to get to a beach that they want to go. So that would be a huge priority for my administration when it comes to opportunities to expand both access and use it as an opportunity to clean up some of these environmental sites that have been problems for years, and we've just prioritized other things over the environment, and so that's the answer to my question, or to your question, sorry.
Previously, you mentioned floodgates and barriers. You also mentioned the Billion Oyster Project. And so, there's 520 miles of shoreline in New York City, and they really vary in terms of what they're like, what the threats are, what is around them. How would you balance those two distinct kinds of flood protection interventions and resiliency methods, both nature-based green infrastructure and then sort of the hardened, more constructed gray infrastructure?
That's a really good question, and I would say that I would leave that to the experts. I mean, we all know that there are some communities that are more at risk. We know that just from Sandy. So I think that one of my first priorities, or what I would task the deputy mayor is doing, is really coming up with the top 10 list of places that are the most at risk, and really focusing on funding solutions to get people, whether it's to raise the forgive me for forgetting the word, but essentially raising the soil, or creating water-based barriers or gates. And also the Build It Back program was great in theory, but we still have not built back from Hurricane Sandy. That job is still not complete, all these years later. So I would ask my deputy mayor to identify the 10 most vulnerable places and really try to put as much funding and infrastructure remediation as I can to protect those communities from the next superstorm, because we know it's coming.
You're the first person who is, that I've heard at least, who has come up with the idea of a deputy mayor for the waterfront. Who are three people that might be in contention for the role?
Samantha Maldonado and Tyler Taba. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think that you probably know that that I'm going to pick my positions in City Hall in a very, very different way than other candidates. I have seen over the course of administrations, good commissioners, bad commissioners, cronies. We've seen a lot of that here. So I've already committed that I'm going to pick my both my commissioners and my deputy mayors in a completely apolitical way. I'm going to have a policy of subject matter experts, in this case, waterfront experts. They're going to do a nationwide search. They're going to come up with candidates for the position. They are going to recommend three people for the position to me, and I'm going to choose one of those people. And that way, people will know that I'm data-driven, that I really care about deep subject matter expertise, that I'm not trying to have someone scratch my back or scratch someone else's, and that the people that they serve, and the Waterfront Alliance obviously would be a key partner in this, that they can have confidence in the person that they're stepping into those shoes to make sure that we do the job that's necessary. Because particularly with respect to resiliency and adaptation, like this is for all the marbles. Like we all know that we are 40 years behind where we should be as a world. And New York City, you're right. In one of the pieces I read from the Waterfront Alliance, that New York City should be a proud leader, but we are still so far behind where we could be if 20 years ago we had taken some of these things seriously and done things like white roofs and reflective roofs. And if we now try to rebuild buildings and put composting in kitchens with some of the new technologies that allow in kitchen composting, there are a million different things that we could be doing to be better off than we are. And as mayor, I really want to land that plane. I hate to use that analogy. It's probably not very environmentally friendly, but you know what I mean? I've got 3 kids, you know, they're 18 to 22. They're going to make New York City their home when they're out of school. And I want them and their kids to grow up here for generations and have the cleanest, healthiest, most climate resilient and carbon neutral community city that we can. And I would like to be a mayor that really makes that a priority, not just talking points during a political campaign. We've got lots of white papers, all of which are not environmentally friendly. But what we really need to do is block and tackle to get carbon down.
How would you do this, especially given the hullabaloo, I should say, at the federal level? There's funding cuts. Federal funding is immensely important given some of these priorities that you laid out and some of the projects that are already ongoing. Tell us how you would, you know, make sure that New Yorkers get what's theirs or make up the loss.
Yeah. So I guess I want to answer your question by saying, if I answer this question, I don't know, President Trump might arrest me or something for saying that I'll be an environmental conspiracist or something. It's going to be, Samantha, it's going to be a really challenging time. I mean, look at it from a financial perspective. You know, we may have, I'm not even sure that this is true, but we may have something of a surplus this year based on current projections. Although every time I hear of a new program from this administration, I see that surplus going down. But if the state comptroller is right, we're going to be in an area very soon where we've got billion-dollar budget deficits. We've got a strain on our business community. And so we've got a tax base that is potentially shrinking on top of the deficits. And we have to fund this. So I need to find a way to fund it, but I can't rely on the federal government as a partner. So we have to have a hard conversation with Albany about the way that we are providing a lot more money to Albany than we should, and we need to take some of that money back. And we're going to have to come up with more creative strategies for imposing micro taxes statewide to support New York City, because without New York City and its vibrance, New York State is going to be left behind in terms of advancement nationally. And we've got so many challenges, and honestly, climate challenge is probably one of the biggest problems. So that's a long way of saying I want to get it done. You asked me though, how am I going to get it done? I'm going to start in the waterfront for sure. But in terms of green initiatives, I'm going to start by replacing as many NYCHA buildings as I can and have those buildings converted into green, sustainable infrastructure where we have in-kitchen composting and we have better ways to dispose of waste, and the buildings are more energy efficient. I mean, they are a huge part of the portfolio of buildings. No one's talking about rebuilding them. I'm the only candidate in the race that actually has a plan to rebuild 7% of them a year. It's super important to me from an equity standpoint because the lives that people are living in those buildings, I'm shocked that there's not massive respiratory problems because of the mold in many of those buildings. But when it comes to the waterfront, I understand the challenges. I mean, the first thing that we need to figure out how to fund and get done is a storm surge barrier that will protect all of New York City. That's really what we need. And that is something that we're not going to be able to do without some level of cooperation from the federal government. There are billions of dollars in Washington right now set aside for resilient infrastructure. And if we have an administration that only wants to punch Donald Trump in the face, we are going to lose out on that money. So it's tough because I think people watching this probably know my own personal perspectives on the president and his fitness for office. I've been quite public about that. But at the same time, we need to have something of a partnership with Washington in order, for example, to get a massive storm surge barrier built. So
Right.
I'm rambling, aren't I? Let me just summarize in three pithy things. Overall, the waterfront will get better if we get carbon down. That's number one. Number two, resilient infrastructure is going to require cooperation with Washington, and I'm going to do what I need to do to get that done. I had a third point, but I'll just shut up and let you move on with your questions. Sorry, I didn't mean to filibuster.
No, it's great. I was going to point out that storm surge barrier, among other things, if you're referencing the Army Corps of Engineers plan, that cost $52 billion. And that was, at least 3 years ago at this point. So it's probably gone up.
I think they proposed it first in like 2019.
It goes back.
Yeah. In any event, I mean, honestly, it's crazy to me. And this is one of my frustrations with our government, which is, we have campaigns. People talk about promises. We have white papers. We have dozens of white papers. And at the end of the day, the actions that we need to take, we all know what they are. And somehow they just fall through the cracks.
Yeah. Well, we have a minute left, so I have some rapid fire questions for you.
Oh, that was quick.
Time flies when you're having fun. Have you been out on the water in a canoe or kayak within New York City?
No, I have not.
Will you commit to doing so in the first 100 days if you're elected?
Only if you and Tyler go with me.
We can watch.
Oh, wait, no, I want a commitment. You asking for
We've done it. We've been in the water.
All right. Well, I'll go.
Thank you for joining us.
I'll go with the two of you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, is that it? Okay.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Oh, and our fourth one is Michael Blake, who I actually think might be maybe I didn't have to boot Mr. Jim Walton off so fast. I could have asked him more questions. Well, in that way, I think one of the things that I was thinking about as we were having this conversation is that Army Corps of Engineers study. I'm sure some of the people on here are familiar with it. It's that $52 billion New York Harbor study plan. And it was, proposed many years ago, I believe over a decade ago now. And that's one of the programs that I'm sort of looking at and keeping an eye on. It seems like it's in some sort of limbo and planning stages now still. And that's one that I know many people probably on this call are involved in terms of weighing in on what it should do, what it should look like, where it should be, whether there's green infrastructure or hardened infrastructure, things like that. And, given the new federal regime, I wonder where it's going to go. So that's one of the threads I'll be reporting on in the coming year or so, maybe longer. I'm just checking to see. Oh, it looks like we've got him on. Okay. Hi, Mr. Blake. How's it going?
Good evening, everybody. How you doing?
Thank you so much for joining us.
Good, thank you.
Great. Well, we're glad to have you here. Again, thank you so much for joining us for the 5-Borough Waterfront Mayoral Forum. You are last after 3 others have come to talk to us. And so I was hoping you can just start with a brief introduction about yourself, and then any sort of remarks you want to make in about a minute or so that tells us why you're here in terms of your vision for the waterfront.
Good evening, everybody. Again, hope that everyone is doing well. And of course, among all New Yorkers, let's go Knicks tonight, right now. My name is Michael Blake. I come to you as a former assembly member from the South Bronx, served for 6 years, where all things around water, including the Bronx River, is so critical to me. Before this, I worked for President Obama for close to 7 years. Within that, we focused on our efforts at Green for All, because we understood the opportunities of how do we transform our cities and country for the better. I'm running because we have to address affordability, we have to protect our environment, and we actually have to ensure that we're reimagining what's happening within our city. And when we think about the support that we've been building across New York City right now, it's because I'm the only candidate who's been a part of a team that has defeated Donald Trump, and I'm the only one with White House, State House, and local experience in this moment. And so our job is to make sure that we're not just protecting for today, but as we say, tomorrow begins today. And so I look forward to the conversation we're about to have on tonight about not just how we protect our waterfront, but how do we reimagine New York City. You're muted.
Wow, I haven't learned anything in the pandemic. All right. So I'd like to ask you to define what climate resilience and adaptation means, in particular in the way that it manifests in New York City.
First, we have to understand and appreciate that we have not taken the time to be intentional around the changes that are happening around resilience and adaptation. And that is everything around infrastructure and design. That's everything around our planning. It's the recognition and appreciation that, yes, due to climate change, which as we know, emissions coming more from buildings, not just from vehicles, that we have to be intentional about the shifts that are happening in our communities and it relates to water. And so to that degree, it's being very proactive around what are the structural steps that we have to take in that moment. That means how do we reimagine our infrastructure so that we're able to have better water filtration. It's about being thoughtful around what's happening within our climate. You think about, in particular, oysters, for example, which people don't think about how that can lead to greater opportunities around maritime within our waters for a safer dynamic there. It's the understanding that extreme heat and extreme cold are impacting our climate every single day, and that we cannot continue to ignore the ramifications that it has in what we're doing in our community, what we're happening in our cities. And so to that degree, it's being very proactive around how do we have a universal vision around the changes that are happening in our city, where we are becoming hotter, where we're having more extremities and relates to the extension of our winters and summers, but also understanding that then that means how we build, how we rebuild, and how we reimagine our city has to be attentive to the adaptation that is happening. And that's the way I think, and that's how I approach infrastructure, how I approach resilience, and how I approach our strategy from urban design.
Can you paint that vision for us about specifically the waterfront and how you would see it then, given those challenges?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a few different pieces. I think first, how do we think through training the next generation of young people to be intentional on the front lines of what's happening in terms of the housing and commercial development that's happening on our waterfront. How do we think about flood defenses that have to happen around 250 miles of our coastlines? How do we think through a strategy around economic justice so that's aligned with environmental justice? I've done this work with Green Bronx Machine and others to that degree. It's a prioritization of minority women-owned businesses to be able to hire and be thoughtful around a citywide waterfront equity resilience pool. So you can create jobs around that dynamic. I've said often that we need to have 600,000 affordable climate resilient housing units around our vision of Mitchell-Lama 2.0, where we don't just have an area median income, but we have a local median income so that we can be much more intentional and thoughtful about the reimagination of what our buildings look like, what's happening by our water. It's retrofitting what's happening around NYCHA, retrofitting our rainwater systems to be much more thoughtful and intentional to that degree. It's making sure that we dedicate a minimum of 1% around our annual budget to parks and open space and green infrastructure, especially along the water. It's being thoughtful around how do we utilize our budget, how do we utilize our policies, how do we use our bully pulpit to be very thoughtful, specific, and clear around how we protect our waterfront and how do we reimagine our city.
I'm curious also if you can define the kind of relationship you want New Yorkers to have with the waterfront. Obviously, the waterfront can be a threat. It can be a recreational resource, a place for jobs. There's all sorts of things that are happening there. Tell me about that.
I'll actually use a personal reflective moment as a reverend, where the scripture that has held me true is connected to the water. It talks about how the wind and the waves made people nervous. And in that moment, Jesus calmed people down to think through that. I start there because I do think that we have to be very positive and forward looking around how we think about the water, while we also understand that, yes, there will be climate changes that are going to happen. There will be environmental emergencies that will happen, but we can be resilient around it. We didn't need to take the steps to learn what happened with Superstorm Sandy, in which we did not have a resilient plan up front the way we needed to. As we're watching right now, and especially because of the federal dynamics with FEMA, where they clearly are not giving us the intentionality around planning ahead of time. It's about us saying to everyone, for us to have the city that we need and that we deserve, we have to embrace the waterfront and not be afraid of the opportunities that exist before us. And so a part of that is around economic justice. A part of that is making sure that we're taking our students to teach about the dynamics of it. A part of that is also being very clear that we have to teach more people how to swim, how to have recreation, how to have employment opportunities, I reference. And as we think through housing, that we're not just making it a scenario that only those that are super rich are able to have access to these opportunities. And so the incentive structure has to be intentional around all of us having that access. It's the reason why Samantha said that there has to be a local median income. I don't believe area median income works when you think about Westchester County or the places impacting us. And so our relationship is that we can't have a New York City unless we appreciate what's happening on the waterfront. And it's not just in celebrating what's happening at the beaches from a recreation standpoint. Yes, I understand that. It's about how do we be thoughtful that it's a job opportunity, that it's a educational opportunity, and it's a societal change that can happen here. When I mentioned the oysters, for example, people don't really think about that often, but when you have schools that are being thoughtful in teaching that, it's because, as we know, there's more water than land. And so how are we being thoughtful around the broader, specific, and practical ways that we can reimagine our city in this moment?
One of the challenges that we're facing now as a city is federal funding cuts, of course, and cuts to staffing as well. We rely on that for many of our projects along the waterfront, and even just some of the ways we study and plan. So what are two ways you would ensure that New Yorkers who live and work along the waterfront, as well as the infrastructure and the buildings that they depend on, how would you ensure that they're safe and prepared as climate change continues? We'll get more storms, more flooding, sea level rise.
I appreciated you asked for two specific answers. I like that right there. So first, we have to end outdated tax exemptions that exist so that we can actually redirect funds towards climate infrastructure. One of which is that, as much as I'm a Nick fan, ending the property tax exemption that's happened for Madison Square Garden, where you can redirect funds to make sure we're focused around this for that exact purpose. Second, I do believe that we should have more progressive revenue streams where we could have a vacant luxury apartment tax and a vacant commercial tax, where we could raise funds at a minimum about $400 million so that you can be dedicated around all efforts, not just around the waterfront directly, but neighborhood cooling centers, clean energy microgrids, and coastal zones, wetland restoration, shoreline protection, et cetera. And so to your question being very specific and succinct, those are two very concrete ways that we can take the steps to be able to address what is happening nationally and be able to make sure we have the funding locally to protect us what's happening here.
I'm curious also if you can speak to the ways that growing and greening the maritime sector of the city is an opportunity, and how you would approach that in the next 4 years. Where would you start, and where would you want to end up?
Paramount, paramount. We have to be very thoughtful and intentional in seeing what other places around the country are doing around maritime. You see this, for example, up in Martha's Vineyard, how they were able to utilize wind turbines out in the water to then make sure they were training that next generation of jobs, of skills for the short and long term. And so when we think about this, how are we showing our young people around the impact around diving, around how are we thinking about what's happening around the grid? What are we doing to make sure that we're actually cleaning underneath itself? Because too often we're only thinking about just the shoreline itself. And so I do think that there's an opportunity for transformative job creation, short and long term, connected to maritime. You know, too often the language and conversation is just around, well, is someone only engaging in shipping without thinking about the collective opportunities that exist throughout this? And I think when we are thoughtful around this and specific around this, we're able to not only be specific and clear in our schools, where there has to be dedicated curriculum earlier on for our students to be able to learn about what's happening here, but also for those that may not go to a foreign institution, but that there's vocational training that's happening around maritime as well. Lastly, I do think that we got to reimagine what's happening around community wellness and climate defense, because I also think that's intertwined around the job opportunity, because then people will see I have incentives to be engaged here. Too often it seems distant and far off, but we can actually show how people can have an opportunity now and in the future.
I'm curious also, I mean, it's great that you're talking about job creation. I think that's a theme that the other candidates have not hit on, quite frankly, in this forum. But there's other things to think about as well when it comes to maritime and industry. There's, the ports, there is the blue highways to get traffic congestion down off of the trucking routes, even offshore wind generation, which faces some very large roadblocks at the moment. How would that sort of manifest within your plan and the vision?
Absolutely. Working backwards, offshore, again, I utilize that example as reference as we see in Martha's Vineyard, places where there's an opportunity to make sure we're protecting our environment and it not being this far off, disconnected thought, because too often with climate change, there's being a conversation around what's happening 20 years from now, 20 weeks from now, to that degree. When we think about the opportunities that equally exist, it's about also how do you have examples such as in Brooklyn with Make McGinnis Safe, where you can have smaller vehicles actually mobilizing cargo, so you don't have just the larger ones doing so. Thinking about broader open space strategies such as Paseo Park out in Queens to also demonstrate that you can appreciate it from a broader dynamic. As you know, as both of you know, we're talking about essentially 700 plus miles of coastline into this dynamic where we have to be teaching around the strategies. Earlier today, to your question, Samantha, I saw that NOAA was actually stating that they need to find more ways to hire more people because of the lack of appreciation that's happening within the collective industry. And so I see this as an opportunity to be able to find multiple outlets beyond just the economic one, as I mentioned, so that you have, yes, environmental protections, you have educational opportunities, but also when you think about how do you reimagine what housing looks like. And in order for us to challenge and address the two fundamental expenses in New York City of childcare and housing, to do that and do that well, we also have to reimagine how we are building. And part of that will be around environmental design that is thoughtful and appreciative of the climate changes that are coming, not just for now, but in the future.
Speaking of those climate changes, there's, as you mentioned, miles and miles, 520 miles of waterfront here in New York City. They're all very different, facing different kinds of threats. And so how, when you're thinking about protection and infrastructure, would you balance nature-based solutions and then the more constructed solutions, such as flood walls and flood barriers?
Well, look, I think that how do we be specific and clear based upon that geography for that respective borough, so that we are not disrupting the ecological patterns that are happening below? And how do we get more appreciative of, whether it be through satellites and other mechanisms, what are the ways that we can build and rebuild the structures, so that we can have greater growth of the fish and those that come thereafter here. Too often, the development or the lack thereof that is happening is leading to a scenario where we are building effectively an artificial environment, or we're not allowing for nature to grow and to thrive the way it should and could. And so I do believe that, yes, we have to find ways, the greater barriers for flood walls, et cetera, but we have to find more appreciative ways on how is it connected to what that natural environment is for that geography.
I'm going to do some rapid fire questions. What is your favorite New York City water body and why?
I think probably about Governor's Island, because I've been able to be out there and see the opportunity around oysters, quite frankly.
Have you been out on the water anywhere in New York City on some kind of boat, a canoe, a kayak? Ferry does not count.
By a canoe, and I couldn't hear the second part.
Or kayak? Dragon boat?
I haven't. I've done I guess I've done the speed ferry from Soundview, but I have not done the other two yet.
Okay. If elected, would you commit to going on the water in a canoe or other kind of boat that's not a ferry?
Oh, absolutely. I'm down for it. I'm down for it.
Great. Thank you for that. And I'm also curious, if there's a place that you go by the water frequently in your neighborhood, or just where you find yourself around town.
Well, there's not a lot of water by my neighborhood where I'm at. I'm over by 161 and 3rd. So I would revert back to the previous one. Sitting by the ferry area over by Soundview. It's restorative. It is restorative.
Thank you for that. And we're in our final minute, so I'm going to allow you to speak to anything that I didn't ask or that you didn't get a chance to speak about in this kind of thematic sequence. You have about a minute to wrap up. So thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity, everyone. Again, my name is Michael Blake. Born and raised in the Bronx, New York, former assembly member, co-sponsor of environmental protections many times in the assembly. I do want to also make sure we talk through broader affordability opportunities that exist on how we end credit scores when it comes to rent home ownership applications. How do we have civics, financial literacy, and mental health for our students? How do we be very thoughtful of keeping and putting more money in your pocket? Doing those things allow us to protect our environment in a thoughtful and protective way. And so again, if you are looking for the next generation of leadership that has protection, has opportunities, and has experience at all levels, my name is Michael Blake. Join us at blakefornyc.com so we can keep building with you. And I thank you for the opportunity tonight.
Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it.
And thank you all for joining us at this panel. We really appreciate you all being here. I think the participants got up to over 100 for sure, maybe 120 if I was counting correctly and looking down at the right times. We really appreciate it. And thank you to the Waterfront Alliance for pulling this together. I have to give a shout out again. You should read The City. We're at www.thecity.nyc. You can sign up for our newsletter called The City Scoop. Check out Meet Your Mayor. It's the mayoral matching quiz. Maybe some of your answers will be affected by what you heard tonight. I'll turn it over to Tyler to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Samantha. In the Q&A, somebody said you did a great job, and I totally could not agree more. So thanks so much for moderating. It was amazing. And thanks for everybody who signed up and joined. I hope this was helpful. We were happy to hear from the 4 candidates about their positions on waterfronts, from resiliency to access to maritime and all the things that are happening. Hopefully we can hear from more candidates about this issue in the next coming days and weeks. And we'll be sure to keep you posted if we do. This is recorded and will be posted on our YouTube at Waterfront Alliance, and we'll share it with the 17 co-sponsoring organizations. And I think we'll do our best to help get the word out about the candidates' answers to these questions so that we can, we're not, I should be very clear, we're a 501c3. We do not endorse candidates, but we do this because we want to get the candidates to be talking about the issues that we care about. And it's really educational, and to help them know that we care about the waterfront, and to help you make an informed decision when you're thinking about who the next best leader should be for the city. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I know we're 2 minutes over, so really, really appreciate it. And thanks again to all the co-sponsoring organizations and Sam for moderating, and hope you have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.